Most people are just saying, hey, we do this, we help people just like you. We're going to revolutionize your business and let's get on a call to talk about it. And that's just not going to work. So the way that we've all been sort of conditioned about cold outreach, where it's like some kind of pitch. We're trying to ask something of someone without even knowing them. As far as the message goes, we have a few different kind of openers that we test. Quickest way to gain trust is to...
Yes.
Do you want to turn prospects into clients? Thomas Ryan Oakes helps B2B service businesses find and close new clients with a proven value offer outreach funnel that is irresistible.
Have you explored at all with ads for any of your clients?
I think ads are good and ads are great once you're like 100K a month.
What other tools do you consider like?
Another application called Gamma. If you have an actual good value offer and you won't deal with really upset people.
So let's do it.
Most people think they need a large audience or paid ads to get clients, but you ultimately say that's a myth. So curious to understand what you think is the fastest way to land clients.
Yeah, I mean, I find, especially if you're in a B2B service space, really the quickest way to, gain trust and start getting clients is to really just start solving their problem, right? And that's kind of hard to do through ads, and if you have an audience, that's a great tailwind. But one just much faster way is to be reaching out to them and kind of offer something of value, what I call a value offer, and to put that in front of them. And that's really the fast way to get someone to trust you and pay attention to you, is if you start solving their problem right away. And that's what we do with our clients to kind of develop what's that strategy look like and then execute that for them by first starting with, hey, what's the problem that your prospects have and how are we going to solve that out of the gate?
Now, and while I want to dive into that one, I do want to ask this question because a lot of individuals, potentially myself, Arton included, are the type of individuals sometimes where it's like, cold outreach. It can feel, I don't want to call it painful, but a lot of people do have negative associations with it. And I'm just curious to your thoughts on how individuals can approach it if they're already like, I would rather, because that's, I think a lot of why people go to ads or sometimes even more complex, crazy content creation, because they think it's a faster way to attract clients when in fact, as you mentioned in your introduction a little bit, it's not necessarily the way to do so.
Yeah, I think the way that we've all been sort of conditioned about cold outreach for decades now has been where it's like some kind of pitch, right? Where we're trying to ask something of someone without even knowing them, which is actually preposterous if you think about it, right? Like you're a total stranger and now I'm interrupting your day and I'm asking you for a call. I'm asking you to pay attention to me. I'm asking you for money, whatever it is, like you're making an ask. And that's how still like 95% of outreach is done that way. You see it every day in your inbox. And we want to kind of flip that. And how do we lead with, we're actually going to give you something. We're going to start solving your problem. We're going to be helping you. And so when you do it that way, you recognize the person, and personalization and relevance are very, very important in this, but you're recognizing the person. You're recognizing like, hey, this might be a problem. I've helped other people solve this. Can I start solving the problem for you without asking for anything? Right.
Right. That makes sense. And I want to dive into to how you approach that, because sometimes is there an email attached or other things? But before we go there, maybe just to make sure that everybody understands, your journey to you launching Referral Program Pros, can you just walk us through that a little bit and how you became a pro, if you will, in this area?
Yeah. I mean, I got my taste for entrepreneurship in my 20s. I started a travel company in Europe after I studied abroad there in Italy and Florence, and then started a travel company there. And so in my 20s, I was like, it was the best job in the world. Like I was carting, study abroad students and backpackers around Europe, kind of showing them places, trips leaving from Florence and Rome, and doing that every weekend. And then doing marketing in between. So I kind of just, had a love for entrepreneurship kind of right away. And then decided, hey, I'm not going to live in Europe forever. I'm not seeing my friends and family. I moved back to the States. I get into corporate, and I kind of rose through the ranks and became the COO at a fintech company in Bellevue here for a number of years. Nice. And there I was really helping, as a platform of 7,000 businesses that were buying and selling from each other. I won't get into the mechanics of the business, but But my job there was to really look at, well, how do we frame all of these offers so it's super clear to all the other members so that they know what the business does, who
Yeah.
they serve, and how to buy from them, like what's their offer. So through that, I kind of became like an offer junkie, you could say, and like that's the lens I look at things, and it's, offers are really really interesting to me, and so that's kind of what. But I saw a big gap in the market. I'm like, there's so many business owners, SaaS founders, consultants, coaches, any B2B service provider but their LinkedIn is like such a good path and everybody checks it. It's like the first thing you check, other than your website. But, the profiles aren't in good shape and they're not doing actual, like any kind of outreach to get clients that way. And
Yeah.
so I just took that concept I had learned in corporate and applied it to this new business.
Nice. And then how long have you been within your own company now?
Just almost 4 years now.
Okay, got it. Great.
If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to click on the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell. It lets YouTube know you want to support the This Is the Way podcast, and it helps spread the word, and we greatly appreciate it. And now, back to the episode.
And what I will at least say about, your approach and system, if, for lack of better ways to put it, we're on this podcast now simply because you had reached out with kind of some of the method that you said. I'm like, oh, this is intriguing. So it was still an interesting way to sort of think that, wow, all right, you never know what's going to happen. I think when somebody does put themselves out there, but what's going to happen if you don't, ever try from the beginning. So then for you, is there ever a moment where you've doubted, outbound work and you thought, man, maybe I should be turning over to, one of these other popular methods people talk about, especially in the day of AI, where they're like, all your content can be created for you, or, we can run a perfect ad. And, like, how do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the very, very beginning, in corporate, I was doubting because it's like, but that was a whole different animal, a whole different beast. And I was just starting out. And when you're starting out, it does seem tough because it's like you think you have to be selling, like you jump straight to selling, right? And that's the mindset when you first do outreach and you're like thinking of your campaign, your audience, and you're thinking dollar signs out of the gate. And that's not the way to approach it, right? Like the way to approach it is, how do you start a conversation with good faith, but that's also scalable. And the way I like to think about it is what's even a message that you can craft so that the recipient would almost think, wow, I would pay for that, right? I would have paid to got that message. Like that's kind of what you ideally want your copy to be like.
Can you give us an example? I'm just curious because I think a lot of people conceptually might say yes, and then when they get to it, you're like, what do I write?
Yeah.
What is the, because the details is what matters here. So
totally.
Do you have an example to share?
Yeah, for sure. It's really, it boils down to what is your offer. Like you can have all the like little tricks and stuff, and personalization is important, but you got to go beyond like their company or their name or their job title. It has to be like, for the personalization, like what's something that you can recognize about what they've posted about, what they've said about themselves in their profile, what's on their website. We scour all that information before we even start writing the message. But the biggest thing once you get the good personalization down is what's the right offer so that they would have paid to get that. An example would be, like one of our clients now we're working with in the ESG space, sustainability. And he's helping, manufacturing companies reduce their waste and be more sustainable. And what we're offering them is, hey, can we give you a report on some ways that you can do this to become more profitable, right? Like a customized report to become more profitable. And we're using AI to generate a lot of the ideas around that. Yeah. But that's just one example of an offer. Like I offer a LinkedIn profile review. That's what we do. Yep. That's kind of how we start because, hey, you got to get that. That's the first thing to do if you're going to do outreach. You got to get your LinkedIn profile set up correctly. So it's really about what is that free value offer, and that is what's going to inspire people to talk about your paid offer. If that makes sense.
It does. Do you, in that scenario, like I know you mentioned using AI for some components, but like, what about for the LinkedIn? How do you approach that? Because are you sending over the customized sort of, response? Like, how do you scale that or
Yeah,
scale not? Yeah.
the more customized you can make it, the better. And so I'll do a LinkedIn profile review, and it doesn't take that long, and half of them lead to good calls. And so
Yeah.
it's worth it to put in those extra few minutes if you're going to generate a call. Otherwise, a lot of people think, oh, scale,
Yeah.
and that's important. But you could, when you think that way and that's your one track mindset, you might end up sending 10,000 messages or emails, and because it's just so watered down, you actually don't get
Right.
any meetings out of it. And it would have been better just to put that energy into a little bit more on the upfront value offer and actually book the calls.
That makes sense. So I think we're already getting a little sneak peek into your system and how it works, but maybe let's start it from the get go. Like, how does this work for you? And before you dive into that, your choice on for LinkedIn, is that heavily because of the B2B focus, or do you also do a similar reach out on any other platforms? Just so I could set the table.
Yeah, LinkedIn and email. Those are our two
Okay.
channels.
Okay,
That's what
got
we
it.
work with. Yeah.
Then take us through the system. So how does it work?
The way we work with clients is we first set up, well, what who is your targeting, right? And we get very detailed on that to make sure that we iron out all the nuances. Making sure your profile is set up correctly. Those are kind of the first couple of steps. And then we need to craft, what is your value offer going to be? What's your strategy going to be? Right? So coming up with whatever that kind of resource is going to look like. And then what's our conversion process to make sure we're going from that resource to actually booking the call or whatever conversion event makes sense for you. So that's kind of the strategy planning on a kickoff call. And then we execute the campaign, and we're reaching out to those targeted folks with a very personalized message. Like I mentioned, like we want to recognize something that they've said about themselves, an article, something in their about section, their experience section, something very personal that couldn't have been sent to anybody else.
And just to be clear on that, is that based on them going and filling out the form or getting something from you, or is that just based on them visiting your profile?
That's based, yeah. So there's different like relevancy and kind of trigger events we look for as well. Yeah, sorry to leave that out.
No worries.
So we're looking for, that's actually the big kind of, I guess, differentiator is we don't use automation in that sense. We're not just like loading up a list and spamming everyone. It's really about what we want to look for. Who's our target ICP using Sales Navigator? But then where are they, are they who's joining certain groups that are relevant to our offer? Who's, joining certain events on LinkedIn? Who's posting? Who's commenting? Who are they following that's relevant to our offer? So
Yeah.
looking for those different signs, and then because you want to look for also who's active on the platform. That's a big part of what we do. Because if someone's not active, like if you're an owner of a home services small company, like you're not going to be active on LinkedIn. You're just not there. You're out, you're doing stuff. You're out in the field. And so we want to look at the overlap of your target ICP with who's active on the platform, and then look for all those relevancy triggers, and then get them something really good and personalized, and something that's actually going to help solve their problem.
Okay, that makes sense. So Navigator is a key tool in your kit, for lack of a better way to put it.
100%. And the other thing we do too, where the name Referral Program Pros comes from, is we're extracting all of your first degree and second degree connections and seeing where the opportunities are to create referrals, right? So that's the other part of what we do.
Interesting.
And is that just through Navigator, or there's other tools you use to do that?
Yeah, so you can there's a couple of tools like Phantom Buster you can use to extract, anything can extract like your first degree connections and your second degree connections, but then you want a tool like Phantom Buster that'll tell you which of your first degree connections are connected to those second degree connections. So we use AI to help with this. So we kind of connect the dots and say, okay, based on some scoring, here are your first degree connections that are connected to your second degree connections. That would be a good, those would be your ICP. And then we can look at, well, which first degree connections should we ask referrals for? right?
Interesting. So in that scenario, are you literally asking them to connect you to the other person, or am I misunderstanding that when you say referrals?
Yeah, so we would ask like, hey, I'm helping folks, saw that you're connected to Jim. We're helping, other CFOs just like him.
Yeah,
I would love an introduction if it makes sense, and I'm happy to make an introduction if you see anyone
that's
in
great.
my network as well. It's kind of like using LinkedIn the way it's actually meant to be used.
Yeah, you're right.
But it's hard once you start getting thousands and thousands of connections. It's like, well, how are you going to sift through them all and like, stay on top of that and actually make it work? So that's what we do using kind of some of these tools, and we do it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Sorry. Okay. We might have interrupted then as we were going through the the process. So then from there, what does that actual I guess is it the reach out, or sorry, you mentioned the ICP and making sure to declaring that. So some people struggle, I feel like, on really understanding their ICP, or like in some scenarios, like for me, I have a product that's in the career space, and on one hand, there's mid-level professionals, and on the other hand, there's individuals who are starting their careers, who are trying to figure out. Now, it's a lower price product offering, so it theoretically, can work even for those, fresh college students. But it's a big question still of like, how do you direct your messaging the right way? So how do you actually help people hone that in when they're doing that? And if so, how?
Yeah, as far as the targeting goes, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's different things there's a lot of pretty powerful filters you can use with Sales Navigator, but then doing it manually also helps, because like some of our clients, like they might want to work just with women for one reason or another, or just with
Yeah.
men, and so that's not a filter you can use in Sales Navigator. So that's why the
Oh,
human
interesting.
approach works really well. But as far as like basic targeting, like you might want to look at how long have they been in their current position, or how many years of experience do they have in general?
Yeah.
How long have they been at their company? What type of company are they at? Is it public? Is it private? Is
Okay.
it a nonprofit? Is it government? Um, what's the company size, right? So, is it 1 to 10, 11 to 50? Like there's different bands you can
Yeah.
put in for that. You can look at revenue. Another good one is
Okay.
like, what technology are they using? So that can be
I
really,
see.
really helpful depending on what your offer is and what you're selling. So you can look at by
Interesting.
company, what technologies those companies are using, and then get your list of companies and then bring those over to your lead search, and then put in your personas, right?
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So then from there, as you hone around this, back to value offer. So like a lot of outreach still gets ignored. People feel like they have some great lead magnet, as they might, consider it. And maybe you're like, well, because this is similar to a lead magnet, but how do you make sure that it is something that is interesting enough to these individuals? Because a lot of things feel like they just fall on deaf ears. And while I say that, I realize the reason for that for a lot of people too is probably because maybe they will simply put it into the featured section on their LinkedIn, maybe, but they're not actually reaching out and making sure people know. So they're counting on people somehow finding it, which is going to be a low number. But in this scenario where you are going to be doing the reach out, what gets like, how do you know what's going to get the attention? You had the example before, if they're looking around, I think it was an environmental one, but like, is there a specific way you hone in, like, to know that, or?
Yeah, so you kind of want to think about, and there's when you start getting creative, there's like really endless amounts of things you can offer, and some of it might be like not even directly related to what you sell necessarily, but
Interesting.
it's like
Yeah.
solve a problem for them that is ideally it's directly related to what you actually sell. But even if it's not, you kind of take
Yeah.
a step back, like go one layer back, and what's the problem what's the burning problem they're experiencing, and provide something, offer something to help solve that problem. And you have to do some testing sometimes. Like, if you're sending even like if you're sending that to like 50 people and nobody's biting, like try something else. Like
I get it.
that's enough. Like if your offer is good enough, like you should be getting, you know, 10-20% reply rate at least for folks saying, yes, that sounds great. Like something that they kind of can't refuse, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the idea here.
Okay. That makes sense. And you find, and the fact that you're focused on B2B, is that easier or harder than people who are trying to reach out to individuals, in your opinion? Like when I say individuals, I mean like B2C, I guess, in that case.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think so. It's tougher. Like, say you're like a real estate agent, right? You
Yeah,
know, that is a more of a that's going to be more of a B2C play, and it's more of a needle in a haystack. That's why that type of outreach is more
I see.
difficult, and we don't really work with clients in the B2C
Yeah.
space so much because
Okay.
it's hard to find those kind of trigger. It's hard to be relevant, right? Like you have no idea who's about to buy a house. There's no,
Sure.
if you can solve that problem, a lot of real estate
Yeah.
agencies will be banging down your door, right?
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And that's why sometimes then in those scenarios, sometimes the ads are other things because then people are going to click on because then they're basically signaling, yes, I'm looking and I'm interested. But in this scenario, as you reach out to these businesses, I would assume there's also budget wise, there's probably a little bit more opportunity because businesses
Yeah,
look at things different. Yeah.
yeah. You kind of want to look at your unit economics, right? Like if you're in the B2C space, like outside of real estate, your average like new customer is probably not worth nearly as much as like most B2B offers. And so
Yeah.
when you're in the B2B space, you know, each new client for you might be worth 5, 10, 50, $100,000 or more. And so getting on a call with those qualified leads, like those calls are worth a lot, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why the outreach makes sense because it's a very fast path to getting those calls.
That makes sense.
How do you approach, let's say it's a bigger corporation where there just are tons of executives that each have their own budgets? I mean, how do you approach doing something or reaching out to them with something that you know is valuable to that specific executive?
Yeah. So again, I think it just goes back to kind of thinking about what's the problem that they're trying to solve, and I guess the more high value your targets are, the more it makes sense to do some research and figure out what's in this industry, what's the problem these companies are trying to solve, and then
Yeah.
think about what are some of the things I can offer them that's just a pure, like in good faith, like really is going to be super helpful, but might be a competitor report, right? Like what are their competitors doing that I could show them? What are some,
Mm, right.
some things based on, their on some of their, maybe their how they're being funded. If they're maybe a startup or something.
Yeah.
What are some things on their website? How could their offers be structured different? It kind of depends on what your offer is, right? If it's branding or if it's SEO or whatever it is, but you want to like offer something ideally very specific for them that you can kind of crank out at a reasonable rate, but that's like different than what other people are just most people are just saying, hey, we do this, we help people just like you, and we're gonna revolutionize your business, and let's get on a call to talk about it. And that's just not gonna work.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I know for me when I was at Disney, there was a consulting firm at the time that we did hold a meeting with and ended up working with because they did exactly what you just said. They were very specific about this thing and here's how they help. And then they also, in that case, are like, let us do this free, sort of proof of concept, and then that got them in the door to then get more work. And it
Yeah.
also opens up that role of reciprocity where when somebody does that too, well, then, you're like, all right, well, let me do a solid back and try to figure out and see where this relationship can go. I had that happen a few times, actually, come to think about it in the corporate side.
Yeah, and I'll say just one last thing on that is just if you're really getting stuck on what your value offer can be, a good fallback is like just create a video, a generic, it doesn't have to be a personalized video, but create a video. Like if you think about who your prospects are and then think, all right, if I had a good buddy who was one of these prospects of mine and
Yeah.
they were having trouble, what would I do if I couldn't get on a call with them? Well, maybe you just
Mm-hmm.
record a quick video and say, hey, look, and it doesn't have to be like, there's no like high marketing production here or anything. It's just a quick loom saying, hey, I thought this might be helpful. Here's like 3 things that most folks in your shoes should be thinking about or
Yeah.
that aren't thinking about, that I thought would be really helpful. And here they are. And then that's the video. And then, hey, if you want to talk more about how to implement this, feel free to book a call with me right on the video.
Got it.
And then just create that. And that can be sent to anybody, right? And so
Yeah.
it's just a very kind of human to human and then call it something so that people know what the value is in the video, and that becomes your value offer, and that can be sent to anybody.
And I admit, for me, those are usually things that I will take a look at, because they feel like, especially when you see that they're literally talking about, your specific, what relates to you. It's not a message that they've mass produced for everybody. There's this balance there where you're like, oh, wow, okay. And you give it the time because you know that they gave you the time. So I could see that really valuable. Now I'm curious. So for you, do you think people should start more at that scale? I'll call it scale, but more at that difficult to scale approach, because it helps them to also refine what people are responding to? Or do you think they should jump straight into the, I think I'm answering my own question, but the mass offering? Because I think most people do the latter.
Yeah, I think it's great to do, like, it's very popular to say do stuff that doesn't scale now, but in this case, I think it's true that, like, figure out what's going to work first and do some spend a little time testing, figure out what resonates with your prospects, and then you can figure out how to either change it, tweak it, scale it later, so that it's not some horrible watered down version of the thing that is actually working. But you'll find that balance, right?
Okay.
Even if it takes you a couple minutes though to get that out, if that's going to lead to a phone call half the time, in my opinion, that's worth it. It should be worth it,
Yeah.
especially if bringing on a new client for you is like, worth $5,000-$10,000 plus.
Right.
It's worth an extra few minutes, right?
Yeah, that a great point. Well, and I'm curious too, for you and like team wise. So do you have like, what's the size of the team that works on this? Are you more doing this? It's mainly you. Is like, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, so we have a team of 11 now. So we have, campaign managers, operations manager. I work most of the strategy with our clients still.
Okay. Yeah.
But we're growing and looking to be making some of those hires that can kind of help with client relationships and campaign management as well. So
Nice. That's awesome. That's always, I always find that as a good sign when you see the company growing to expand to their, client base. So that's awesome. Good for you. Another question here, because as we went through them, and I know we kind of jumped in with all of our loads of questions, but when you talked about your system, there was the, sort of optimized LinkedIn positioning. There was the defining the ideal client, profile and targeting. There was the crafting the strong value offer. And then there's writing the messages that get replies, which in some cases here, I think we're saying, well, sometimes that's messages that get replies, and sometimes it might be videos that get replies. But I'm curious if you could maybe break out, like, what kind of language you're using in these reach outs to the individuals when you do that.
Yeah, great question. I think, and what we do is really always ask permission to send whatever we're going to send, typically,
Okay.
right? Unless it's like an event. Sometimes if it's like, hey, I'm going to be hosting a workshop for CFOs who are working in manufacturing companies,
Sure.
then we might just send the link, and that works pretty well.
That makes sense.
But usually we're asking permission, and then when they say yes, then we're sending the video, because you don't want to be creating and doing tons of work either, especially if it's personalized, unless you get someone to raise their hand and say yes, right?
Oh, that's a great point. I never even thought about that. Yeah.
So that kind of qualifies your lead, and then your value offer is what's going to kind of demonstrate your expertise. And now you have a reference point to follow up on. Hey, what did you think of that? What I sent over, did that make sense? Can we talk about this so I can help you implement it? So that's kind of the,
okay.
Sorry to clear that up. But as far as the message goes, we have a few different kind of openers that we test for our clients. So sometimes it starts off very, maybe more like complimentary, or what I call like a relevancy opener, where we're recognizing their work, but asking like a business oriented question along with that. So it's kind of like a multi-thread message, basically, where we're complimenting, not over complimentary. You kind of want to be like a 5 or 6 out of 10 on your compliments. You don't want to come off like, you want to stay on their level, right?
Yeah.
But we, hey, saw your post, that was pretty cool. How you mentioned this, totally agree. We want to make it so that it couldn't have gone to anyone else. And then, curious, like, and you might want to just ask a question then about their role or their business or their industry. And then, hey, and then you might just leave with something like, saw saw you're out in LA, hope, everything's, going better with the fires, or something that's like going
Sure.
on with the location they're at. Right. And
Yeah.
so, and we use AI to help with this so we can kind of, get these out, and get them very conversational and human like.
Okay.
But then another strategy would be, and then that leads into kind of the conversation to then propose the value offer later. But you can also just start right away with proposing that value offer, and that would just be something like, you're mentioning what you saw in a recent post or a recent article, and then
Yeah.
how does that relate to why you're reaching out in the first place? Like, saw mentioning that, your post on hiring and how crazy it is in the industry. Totally agree. You know, I, I know, like, HR professionals, let's say it is, like, are strapped for time when it comes to like figuring out the right software to use. Do you, I created a quick video on how to solve that, and what are the three biggest things to look for. Do you mind if I share it with you? So that's kind
Yeah.
of a generic message, but
Sure.
that's kind of the framework, is you're mentioning something that's very personal about what they've written, or their article or post or about section, and then kind of recognizing like what's a likely problem they have, and then offering that solution to solve it and asking permission to send it over.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a great framework too. And I think, again, what you did say before about the asking, I don't know, I think I've heard the term permission marketing out there. I don't know if that's the same thing or not, but
Yeah.
it makes so much sense, because even when you do say, hey, I've put together this video, even though you might not have yet, the idea that you have, it makes a person feel like, well, I mean, if you already put it together, and then, it opens up that, so that then they're more likely to say, sure, send it over, even though the reality is you're maximizing your time, because maybe, 10% to 20%, whatever it is, or even less of people are actually going to say that. It's probably smaller than that. But so that's a really, really great point I hadn't thought about from being on this side of the,
Yeah,
the
for
table.
sure. And,
So,
and a good way to put it is just like, hey, I thought I wanted to share some thoughts with you if you're open to it. Like, that's
yeah,
really all we're trying to do. If it's the video, can
yeah,
I send you a few of my thoughts, right?
yeah.
And that's it.
That makes sense. I love it. So then, is there anything else within that general system that you leverage that we left out, since we interrupted you a few times in there through our excitement?
No, I think, well, one thing, that is actually something else to think about so instead of doing like typical outreach where it's just kind of spamming and asking for a call,
Yeah.
that forces you to go from one lead to the next, and you're not going to, you're going to hit only that like very small, like 1, 2, 3% of the market, maybe, if you're really, really lucky, that actually has that problem. And then they come into the call being like, all right, I got 15 minutes. What's this about? You haven't proved anything. There's no trust. And so that's a problem. But the other big thing to think about is when you do a value offer approach, is you're going to get a lot more replies of people that are interested in that. And now everyone that gets that value offer, those folks should be added to your email marketing as well, right? Because
Yep.
there's a conversation, you've delivered something of value. And so not everyone's going to book a call with you right away, but they might want to book a call with you in a couple weeks from now or a couple months from now. And so those people, it compounds your email marketing list as you go, I guess is my
Sure.
point.
Yeah.
Because all those people should be added in. And so, and then you're nurturing those folks in your normal, email newsletter or whatever as you go. And so it's a great way to actually generate more, email newsletter subs or whatever you're looking for there by starting with your outreach.
Yeah. That makes sense. With that, I'm curious, when do you determine if you're going to reach out to somebody via a DM or via an email?
Yeah, it kind of depends on how big your TAM is, right? Your total addressable market, like how big is that,
Uh-huh.
and who are they, right? Like, so if your total market is like less than 5,000 people, then probably LinkedIn is going to be, as long as they're present on LinkedIn, then LinkedIn's going to be better for you. If it's a really, really big TAM, then you should do LinkedIn and email, right? And and if it's folks that aren't on email, like I mentioned, like if you were trying to reach like home service business owners, like
Uh-huh.
someone who owns a landscaping company, they're not going to be on LinkedIn. Like that's more of an email play. So it just depends, kind of where's the intersection between the size of your market and where are they present? Where are they paying attention? What channels are they paying attention to?
Okay. That makes sense. And now, do you have a specific approach you take to get emails for these individuals?
Yeah, so there's different tools we use to get emails and different kind of data sources if we're going to run an email campaign.
Okay.
Some of the campaigns we run are really really big. I mean, like 10,000 emails plus per day for some campaigns, and so it just depends on again, like kind of who the audience
Yeah.
is will determine where you get the data from and what tools you use to extract.
That makes sense. Okay. Because some of them are better at certain data than the other ones or
Right.
contacts. Okay. That makes sense. You would mention a couple of different things with the AI tools, and I'm curious, or tools in general. It doesn't have to be AI. Obviously, you said Navigator. Navigator is going to let you search more specifically to individuals and based on a lot more details than you would see in regular LinkedIn. View, you also have the ability to do more reach out than you do in the standard LinkedIn by upgrading to that. What other tools do you consider like musts for you? I mean, it sounds like certain cold outreach tools might be, but what else do you leverage?
Yeah, so there's if you're going to be creating like your messaging, for example, like you can use even like ChatGPT is a good tool to use,
Mm-hmm.
or at least getting an understanding of either your email copy or your outreach copy, and you can actually if like take the data, like even just copy and pasting the profile of someone to kind of figure out what are the things you might mention in that message and have like a framework. So, and we have like developed a very in-depth prompts for this
Okay.
to kind of figure out what are the different opener types we use.
Yeah.
But that's that's a great tool. And then, we use, if we're going to, in terms of resource creation,
Mm-hmm.
um, we're using the deep research function on ChatGPT as well, and then we put that. Oftentimes, we'll put that into another application called Gamma,
Uh-huh.
which basically just creates a really nice presentation. So that's a great way
Nice.
if you want to, like, if your value offer is going to be like a slide deck, for example, you can go have ChatGPT do the research for you, put the information into Gamma, and now you have a really good presentation to show someone
Yeah.
that's maybe all about their company, right?
That's awesome. That's great. Any others that come to your mind?
I mean, Loom is a great tool.
Mm-hmm.
They have some AI functionalities there, but that's a great tool for creating kind of like screen share videos. Veed is another one.
Uh-huh.
If you want to even like, you know, if you want to even create like cloning your voice or creating like an AI avatar you can do that within Veed. And that's getting a little bit, we don't do like go that extreme with AI because
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite there yet with things like
Sure.
that. But no, I mean, there's stuff coming. It's moving so fast that it's hard to kind of keep track. But I would say
Yeah.
like, don't get too caught up in all the AI tools. Just think more about what's in an ideal world. What is like a no brainer, slam dunk offer you can make to your prospects,
Yeah.
like a value offer you can make to them, and then figure out how do we actually create this and scale it and do it
Yeah.
faster.
No, I think that makes so much sense and it's so important because people start thinking about how they scale something before they've actually built something to scale. And the process, once it's hardened, is easier to then look at automation. I'm curious on the piece though that you do for ChatGPT. Do you guys just use your own? You use your own prompts, or do you build like a custom prompt that then the whole team uses? Sorry, a custom GPT versus the prompt.
Yeah, so we do. So we'll create projects for our clients within there, and so then we have kind of different opener types that we use, and we have
Yeah.
variables that we use kind of
Okay.
for each client. So we get just really good kind of conversational opener type messages
Yeah.
that are super relevant to the prospect's profile.
Nice. Do you ever feel like sometimes you forget how to write to people because ChatGPT can do some? I'm saying that more for myself. I swear sometimes I'll be like, "What is this?" I'm like, 3 months ago I would have thought this on my own, but now I'm like, ChatGPT, help me out here.
Yeah, if anything, it's kind of the opposite because it's like you're like, okay, I like that's more of a human approach too, and it's like, oh, I'm going to borrow that, and you kind of can update and tweak. And but it's pretty incredible where it is, where the technology is at now, and,
Yeah,
and how human like it sounds, and just very
I agree.
conversational. And honestly, it's like a lot less awkward and more conversational than most people do on their
I know,
own.
right? That's
Will
yeah.
overthink it, right?
That's what's crazy. No, I agree with that,
Yeah.
which is interesting and telling of our future.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Tom, given all these tools, I'm personally, I'm curious, how long does your kind of setup process take to like research and understand, potential challenges? Like how has AI helped speed up kind of that initial planning and setup process?
Yeah, well, that actually leads me to one other tool I forgot about, which is Fathom, which is great, because what we
yeah, that's right. You
do,
said that.
the way you can speed that up is, so if you get on, I get on an onboarding call with our clients, which is usually like 45 minutes, and I'm recording that call, and that's for a big reason, which is that's really going to help us establish what's the tone, what's the strategy, what's the offer going to be, how are they talking about their offer, how are they talking about their service, and how they can help, what's the benefit, and really capturing that language, so that we can then and then I go away and create, by filling in variables. Hey, who you help, how you help them, what's the problem you solve, what's the pain points of your prospects, what's like a compelling metric that you can use to make your case, right? Like
Yeah,
who's a similar client you've helped. These are all things we need to capture on that kickoff call, so we can use that in the outreach campaigns. So to answer your question, when we onboard a client, they complete payment for the campaign. We have a kickoff call that's 45 minutes, and we're live with the campaign, in less than a week. And that's after we,
nice.
update their profile, create their messaging, make sure we're good with the strategy. So it's actually pretty quick. We have a good process down now.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's less than you would think. But Fathom is a big part of that, because you put that transcript in, and it
Yeah.
really helps a lot, just to make sure we're capturing all the right details from.
Yeah. And how about before that step, the lead generation part, like the research that goes into understanding the industry challenges that ICP might have? Like how much time do you spend planning for the lead generation aspect?
Yes, I mean a lot of that's done on the call, and then we'll also you just make sure our targeting is right, and making sure we're looking for those kind of relevancy signs. Was that what
Got
you're
it.
asking? Kind of how we look for the right people?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, two ways. One that, but one also the way you get your own clients.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is really, my target audience is going to be, B2B service providers that, and sometimes I will, depending on the size of the company, it's looking at more corporate, but I also like to work with folks who are kind of, decision makers. So, kind of like mid-sized companies that are growing, just so there's less kind of red tape. Like you'd be very surprised at kind of how little leeway or spending authority, like even like a VP has these days. And so it can be kind of frustrating to work with bigger companies sometimes, just because it's, there's so much, they get caught up in all the
Bureaucracy. Yeah.
bureaucracy.
No, exactly. Yeah, we know.
But yeah, so it's going to be consultants, coaches, SaaS founders, but really any B2B service provider. That's my target.
Okay. So when it comes to obviously all the customers you've had around this, and I'm sure all the, campaigns, if that's the right thing to call them, you've probably run into some failures. What are like some of the biggest, like what's an example of a failure that you had? And I'm curious what like top two things people should be thinking about when they're approaching this as beginners.
Yeah, good question. I think, there are some, you have to really think about who your audience is. And so some audiences are harder to get through to than others, right? Like I would say like people that are in HR, difficult audience a lot of the time. Like if you're an HR manager or a CHRO, those folks get a lot of LinkedIn messages. They got, they're busy. Like it's tough to kind of get through because they're inundated. Same with like, if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, like those people are going to be harder to reach. And so if that's like your list, you have to really be thinking about getting on their radar. It's going to take probably a few extra steps versus just like firing off a message. Right. And
Makes
so,
sense. Yeah.
I'd say like, yeah, the kind of the failures I've seen or had have been, I mean, one, when I was first starting to do this, like we used automation. This is back in corporate, and we got some accounts restricted, got accounts banned.
Got it.
Just because like we didn't know what we were doing in the beginning. This is like 10 years ago, but so there's that. Like you can't just kind of set up automation and expect it to really do anything for you these days. And so, but the big thing is just looking at the audience. Like some audiences are more difficult, and so you have to be more creative the more difficult your audience is.
That makes sense. Have you explored at all with ads for any of your clients, or do you just stay away from that?
No, I haven't really. I mean, I've run ads for our business and in corporate a bit, but like I think ads are good and ads are great if you can, once you're like 100K a month plus, like ads make more sense, to scale more. But, I think like you have to be prepared to put in a significant investment into testing and figuring out what works, and you still might not figure it out. Right. So that's kind of where I sit with ads. Yeah. We don't really touch them.
That makes sense. Okay, so for anybody who is starting today, outbound, what's the first step they should take?
I think talking to a couple of prospects about what their pain points are, so that what value offer would be really helpful for them. And so instead of guessing and testing too much, like have a quick chat with them, right? Like know deeply like what their pain points are, so you can create the right thing to start solving their problems.
Yeah. It's so interesting because even as you say that, I mean, that's the general same best practice for just product creation in general. So this value offer is really just, it's another product, but a product that's a gateway to the, hopefully already validated other product that you're going to try to send them into. Now, are there specific things that you track or that you would recommend that individuals track to be able to measure their success as they move forward?
Yeah, I mean, you track, like, definitely pay attention to your, hitting on kind of the three buckets. There's really only three factors involved with any kind of outreach campaign, and it's, who are you targeting? So who's your audience? So you might want to play around with different types of audiences, make certain tweaks to who you're targeting, different job titles. What are you saying in your message? That includes what is your value offer. So tweaking that, testing that. And then what's the volume? Like definitely pay attention to how many messages are you sending and what is your reply rate looking like? So have really good reporting on, all right, I sent 50 messages today, or I sent, let's say, 500 messages this week, whatever that looks like. And what was my reply rate? And track it week over week and make sure, the data will tell you which value offer, which messaging, which audience is making the most sense.
Makes sense. And how are you generally tracking something like that?
Well, if you're doing it on LinkedIn, and you're doing it, manually, then you're going to be, doing it. Your tracking is probably going to be manual. There's no other way if you're going to do it manually to get that data out of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But if you're doing like email, then obviously, the tools will help you with the tracking.
Okay. I know we've heard of a few tools recently, but I can't remember their names there that do some, it takes the messages into this organized way for LinkedIn. And I wasn't sure whether or not you were leveraging anything like that at this point or not.
Yeah, you can. So, and we're starting to actually look at a tool called Breakcold now. That will help with that. You would still need to tag the lead inside of it, but that's a good way to track that someone has replied positively to your message at least.
Yeah, got it. Art, do you remember what the other tool was that we had heard from somebody?
No,
I think it was Matt who might have mentioned it. He does a lot of basically DM selling and stuff. So yeah, we'll have to figure out what that tool was, but I was just curious. Yeah. Cause for me, that's been that barrier sometimes is like, oh, okay, how do you organize and keep track of, all of this stuff?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I know that when you get like big enterprise, Navigator can be integrated with Salesforce. So a lot of enterprises track their LinkedIn DMs in Salesforce, and you can get pretty cool reports out of it. But that's enterprise level, not your mid to small company.
Yeah.
well,
And I mean, one just quick shortcut is like if you're in LinkedIn, just click there. They have like a star functionality. So if you get a positive reply from someone, just click the star and then you can sort by those
okay,
starred
that's right. That's
leads.
a good
So
point. Yeah.
That's a good workaround.
cool, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you actually leverage? I don't think with the tools that you mentioned, you had said a specific CRM. Are you guys using a specific CRM?
Yeah, so we were using Pipedrive for a while, and now I think we're looking at Breakcold just because
Oh,
just to
that would
keep
be the one. I see.
and they have an agency plan now too, and that kind of pushes us over the edge.
Okay.
But yeah, that's looking like a good option just because they have it integrates LinkedIn and email, so you can keep track no matter which channel you're reaching out to the lead on.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. The other question, this relates to one I had earlier. I want to ask you is, again, cold outreach for some is hard. One of the reasons for that is rejection. So, how do you handle or deal with the rejection when it comes to cold outreach? Because it's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think a good answer for that is look, like some people have rough days and they're going to take it out on you, and you got to just push past. And I would say, like, if you are really, if you have an actual good value offer and you're giving in your messages, you won't deal with really upset people. Like, you're literally just asking
That's a
if
good
you can
point.
give something to them. And that's why you start the right conversations on the right foot when you take that strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But don't get discouraged. Test something else. Um, every no you get, you should be that much closer to a yes, and just find what works, and then when you kind of find that vein of gold, run with it, and just continue on.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And again, with a strong enough offer, you're adding value regardless. So that helps, there. And yeah, I love what you said too about, look, move forward to the next one and keep going. And you shouldn't be angering people if you've targeted your audience right and you're reaching out. I remember at one point, um, I had an experience where somebody was reaching out to individuals, but they were completely wrong market. So it's like, they were targeting people who weren't the right ones. And then that's where you do get the response back where they're like, why are you reaching out to me on this? I'm not, then it just feels insincere. You lost them. So yeah, if you can, your advice is good.
And the way to look at it is like, look, if you're offering a service and you're really passionate that you can help people with your service, then
Yeah.
you kind of owe it to the world to get it out there. And if you're doing it in the right way, you're not trying to spam or annoy people. You're literally just trying to give to them. You should be, it's your responsibility to go and help people, is the way I see it. So it's like, if you're passionate, you can help people, then go do it.
Yeah. Which is that perfect segue to how do people reach out to you if they want to get your help or learn more from you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is just to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Thomas Ryan Oakes on LinkedIn, and that's the best way. Sent me a connection request. Maybe mention that you saw me on the show or something, so I have a little context. That's probably the best way.
Sounds good. This has been super valuable. I know we've taken some things we're going to go and put into a place. So thank you so much.
You definitely gave me a couple of ideas I need to try. So this was pretty good.
Awesome. It's a lot of fun. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Great having you.
Thomas talked about the importance of how LinkedIn can drive sales. So if you want to dive deeper into the LinkedIn process, check out Matt's episode on unlocking LinkedIn dollars.